Okay, hi everybody, nice to see you. Welcome back from the Easter weekend. And let's start with our second session of the Introduction to the Ethics of AI. As always, I would like to start the new session with a little recap of the last session. We will do that every week. And in the last session, I tried to give you a brief or a broad overview of how and what kind of ethics we will be doing here in the lecture. And I mainly tried to tell you that it will be relying on a perspective shift towards what I call human-aided AI. So looking at AI systems of whatever kind from the perspective of human-aided AI systems or socio-technical systems. So basically always asking the question, in what way is this not only a technical artifact, but something that is deeply entangled with societal and socio-technical structures, and especially involving human beings. And I tried to tell you that this paradigm of human-aided AI relies on three pillars or basic propositions, and so on. The first of them was that most commercially relevant AI systems today are hybrid human-computer assemblages. That was this very basic framing. And also, in terms of the societal debate of AI, we often hear this question, will AI kind of replace our jobs or skilled workers and so on? Yes, to a certain degree it will, but it will also create new jobs. But I think in a more general perspective, this paradigm would rather say, maybe humans are not being replaced by AI, but more harnessed, so made use of. It is, at a certain point, it is much too expensive replacing humans by AI system. Instead of making use of these humans for or in AI systems, and I'm stating this with all cynicism possible, this making use of, but just to bring to you that this is a capitalist form of kind of extracting value from human beings that is being done in the AI industry. We had a couple of takeaways, and among these takeaways was that I tried to kind of enumerate different strategies of capturing or harnessing human beings as cognitive subunits of AI systems. And I also stated that this is not a complete list. There will probably be new or other strategies that I just didn't have on my list, but salient ones are, as we kind of had a couple of examples, gamification, turning something into a game that makes user engage in the system so that they provide their cognitive skills to the system and the system makes use of it. Then there's also this, what I call trapping and tracking, where users are effectively coerced into producing or providing some small fractions of cognitive labor. For instance, as you can see it in CAPTCHAs, then there was this harnessing of social motivations, which is a very clever field of engineering social interaction worlds online. For instance, when you engineer social media apps or platforms, dating apps or platforms, but actually all kinds of apps and platforms where you try to bring users into engaging and persistently engaging with your platform so that they persistently produce data or provide some cognitive labor. And there's also click work, which is the explicit labor form of extracting data and cognitive work from people, where people get paid for it, typically fractions of a dollar cent per item, so typically rather low wages, and typically this kind of work is located in areas on the globe where wage levels are lower and work or labor protection standards are lower. For instance, one big field of click work is content moderation on social media, where human beings would have to label, for instance, uploaded images or other user-generated content. For instance, when when you upload something on Instagram that is maybe prohibited content by the platform guidelines, the typical life cycle would be that, for instance, either other users flag your contents as inappropriate, or an AI system would detect that this could be inappropriate content, and such flagged content would then go either to an AI system that can do a classification automatically, which in some cases is possible, but in average, the AI system will not with certainty be able to decide on the case, so it will then go to a click worker that has to say, is this pornography, is this violence, is this war scenes, is this child abuse, and so goes the list. So you see that if you look at it from the perspective of the click worker, you will not see the cat videos or the flowers and so on, but you will see a high proportion of inadequate content where you have to judge corner cases. For instance, is this an underage person on the image or not? Is this sexualized violence or flirtation? So you will all day long see rather hard images, and it is well documented that these content moderation workers suffer from post-traumatic stress disorders after only a couple of months. After a couple of months of labeling such images every 20 seconds, the next image, and that for 10 hours a day. And this labor is typically done in countries that don't have a high labor protection standard, which also includes they don't have a high, for instance, health insurance or healthcare system, so that this form of capitalism even sources on the health, on the mental health of these people working there, and it comes with huge external costs that are then in the end paid by these societies, which are usually already in the lower position of global power imbalances. This is kind of the click work story of it, which is why click work is also a central topic of how AI is an exploitative and extrication regime worldwide. Good. That was kind of what we did last week. And then also in the last week, but we didn't come to it, I wanted to present you a very brief overview of the lecture, how it works. It has 14 sessions, as most lectures or courses in a normal term. And I have already a preliminary program, and this is explicitly subject to change. It's really possible that I kind of make a decision that I skip something or rearrange the order. Please don't count on this, but this is what I envision from looking at it from now. And the lecture will have 3 big parts, or 3 big blocks, which are here in these colorful rectangles. The first block, let's call it ethics and power. In the first block, each block has 4 sessions. And in the first block, I will kind of try to deliver the philosophical foundations that we need, which is some rough orientation in the field of ethics and some slightly more in-depth orientation in the field of social philosophy and especially theories of power. The reason, and I will explain to you at length, the reason is that we are doing here a power-aware ethics of AI, which is kind of the unique approach here in Osnabrück. By my work group, the idea is you cannot do ethics of AI without considering power constellations. And I think in the intro you saw that already. There is so much ethics out there that deals with very unpolitical questions. This will be an ethics that blends with political questions, and therefore, more systematically speaking, an ethics that blends with social philosophy. And social philosophy also contains political philosophy. And I will try to make that clear in the first, or lay the foundation for that in the first 4 sessions. After that, I will turn to another block. I termed it AI, Ideology and Politics. This is actually a new block compared to the last years of this lecture, because after what's going on in the US and has been going on over the past maybe year, 2 years, it has become more and more apparent that AI today is also really an issue of ideology. An ideology that is currently turning into even, you might call it fascist politics. This is an emerging debate for a reason right now, and I will try to cover some of that in this middle block of the lecture, and also try to bring to you what are the ideological underpinnings of extractivism or AI-driven capitalism, extractivism, and maybe even all the way to fascism. I think that is a very timely thing to do in an ethics of AI lecture in early 2025, before it's too late. And the third block will then turn to the more, in the first two blocks we are on a very broad perspective. We will look at AI as kind of as a whole and so on, or as a large discourse. In the third block we will turn more to what can we do questions. How can we take responsibility? That concerns each of us as in some way or another practitioners in the AI field, but as you will see, I will also put a lot of emphasis on good regulation, or on the necessity of regulation in AI, and also on how one can do regulation that does not hinder innovation. That will kind of grow out of the two previous blocks in a rather natural fashion, so you will see. There will be a certain emphasis on the EU digital legislation, so that is a Eurocentric focus that I'll be adopting here, because we are in the EU, and also the EU is, in a way, world leader in regulation of AI. While we always moan that we are not world leader in AI, I always say, well, look, but we are world leader in regulating AI. I think it's also interesting to look at this, and actually also at its huge limitations here in the lecture. Yeah, that is basically the program. I also wanted to bring some recommended readings to you, and I will only kind of bring broad recommendations now. This is a book that heavily influenced me, actually. I think without that book I wouldn't be here on this position, and maybe I wouldn't even have turned to critical theories of AI as a postdoc researcher 8 years ago or something. Weapons of Math Destruction, and a nice word play by Cathy O'Neill. It's already a little bit dated. It's from 2016, but still it's a worthwhile reading because it is basically a 300 pages examples book, and the examples are still current. They are from 10 years ago, but they are still there, and they would still work the same way nowadays, or even worse. There's also this very important contribution, Algorithms of Oppression, by Safiya Noble, that has a critical race perspective on how such seemingly harmless stuff as search engines or targeted advertisement would reproduce racism and other forms of structural oppression. That is also a highly influential reading. We will come to that in the session on bias, which is currently staged for the 9th session in the lecture. Automating inequality, very important. You see my choice is I always pick things where it gets political. Yeah, these are all ethical questions, but they are already phrased in terms of power relations or societal constellations. It's less who should the self-driving car kill, but more what is going on in society and how is technology increasing certain injustices or disparities. Automating inequality is an ethnographic work. It's methodologically quite interesting because it's not a philosophical work. It's written by a renowned ethnographer, Virginia Eubanks, who has basically 3 big case studies. It's a nice reading, maybe even bedtime reading if you like. There are more like comprehensive approaches like this, Data Feminism by Ignacio and others, a very important contribution from a feminist perspective on AI and data science ethics. So it's the focus is here data ethics, but we will be doing a lot of data ethics here in the lecture. And also this very important book, it doesn't pop up, click, Race After Technology, by Benjamin also has this continuity with colonialism, critical race theory perspective on technology and AI. And the same goes for this here, the cost of connection by Mejias and Coldry, who have this global south and global inequalities perspective on AI. Yeah, if you look for the more Eurocentric mainstream white male approaches, you can turn to these books here, although they are not all written by males. But this is Mark Köckelberg, AI Ethics, a very short read by MIT Press, MIT Shorts. It's really something that you can read it in one day. And I would say much of what Köckelberg does there is very akin to what we'll be doing here, although, yeah, different, of course, but it's rather close to the lecture. Virginia Dignum has this nice book, Responsible AI, which is written for an engineering audience in mind, with an engineering audience in mind. So if you're a more technical leaning person and you want to have it spelled out in terms, like in a terminology that brings it closer to engineering questions, that might be a nice read. We will also use one or two of the chapters in the discussion groups or as the background readings for the lecture here. Yeah, and then last but not least, this book here, it's actually the first lecture here, the first version of this lecture 4 years ago. It was awarded with this Mühlhoff prize for best teaching. I'm not related to that person, to that prize or to the foundation that gives out this prize. But I received the prize, and that also made me turn the lecture into a book. And this is kind of, I worked on it for 3 years, but it was finished last late summer, so in September, and it will appear in May. So in 6 weeks or in 5 weeks. It will be open access, so you can download it as a PDF file from the publisher. And it has basically the whole lecture in it, minus the middle block on AI ideologies, because that was so recent that I did not include it in that book. But there will be a separate book coming up from me called KI und der neue Faschismus, AI and the New Fascism, with Reklam Verlag. It will appear in mid-July this year, which has also this ideology block, but in German. I'm sorry for that. Okay, that was the advertisement block. Sorry. Let's turn to the first content part of today. So I wanted to devote this session on introducing to you some basic concepts of ethics. I always do it in the beginning. And we will be very progressive with what it means to do ethics in this lecture, in that it is already progressive that if you talk about power, for ethicists it is. But before we can do that, we should at least have some basic understanding of classical ethics in the Western philosophical tradition. There are not many good reasons to limit it to the Western philosophical tradition, and I can only apologize for it. But we will do it here as a kind of a background foil against which we will then do some alterations later on in the lecture. Yeah, what is ethics? Ethics is a millennia-old philosophical tradition going back to, in the Western tradition, to the Greek philosophers such as Aristotle. And it is basically a branch that asks about the justification, conception, reflection of what we do, so about action. It's practical philosophy because it concerns with action. And it's always about the good or bad, or maybe right or wrong. There are these two dichotomies, and it's already a good question. What is the relation between the two dichotomies of good versus bad and right versus wrong? That is also an ethical question. But ethics is, as a whole, the reflection about good versus bad, right or wrong action. And while this question about good or bad action can be framed as questions that concern very isolated constellations where we need to act, like, for instance, is it good that I stay here now for the next hour or shall I leave? So I'm raising the question for this very situation. But we can also raise these questions from a much broader, overarching perspective, for instance, asking about the good life. Yeah, then it's not one instant where I have to make a decision, but it's more maybe a whole attitude or a whole bundle of decisions or something overarching. Maybe it also contains on the environment and so on. That is also included in ethics, questions about the good life. Yeah, and I said already that this is ethics is a subfield of the branch of practical philosophy. Yeah, there's, for instance, also theoretical philosophy. But ethics, it's practical because it's not practical in the sense of it's applied philosophy versus theoretical philosophy. No, it's practical philosophy versus theoretical philosophy because it is concerned with praxis, with action, something we do, things we do, things that concern our acting in the world. Yeah, and ethics, within ethics you can also branch. Yeah, there's general ethics, and here now there is applied ethics in the applied sense, in the sense of applied sciences. While general ethics is this branch that would concern general questions, but there are maybe two general questions. I think the biggest point is what you would call normative ethics, and we will engage in that today a little bit, where you would come up with general theories of good versus bad, right versus wrong action, but in general. And there's also meta-ethics. Yeah, meta-ethics dealing with questions such as, okay, what actually does it mean to debate ethical questions? Is it even, I mean, does it have any effect? Is it, why would it be binding to anybody? How can ethical rules be of like compelling force, or what status do they have? These are meta-ethical questions, while the normative questions are like the questions about good versus bad, right or wrong action in general terms. Yeah, and if you apply that to certain domains, then you end up with applied ethics. There is this whole kind of range of applied ethics. Each major scientific field has its applied ethics. Yeah, there are environmental ethics, medical ethics, business ethics, bioethics, and so on. Yeah, frequently in relation to scientific innovation, there are societal or ethical questions concerned with these innovations, and then you have because it gets non-trivial sorting out these questions, and then a new kind of applied ethics subfield is being founded, and people as a career engage in these kind of, how do we apply ethical principles to this specific domain style of questions. You do not see ethics of AI there. I come to that in a second. But before that, there's also something like feminist ethics. While some might put feminist ethics also as a sub-branch here under the applied ethics field, I think that is grossly wrong. It's more, feminist ethics is more a filter, or maybe the opposite of a filter, something that adds and not takes away, but something, a perspective with which or from which you do ethics, all of ethics, applied ethics, bioethics, medical ethics, meta-ethics, and so on. So feminist ethics is more an overarching attitude of doing ethics. And to quote one of the feminist ethicists, it aims to understand, criticize, and correct how gender operates within our moral beliefs and practices and our methodological approaches to ethical theory. So this is especially for you to be aware that there is also overarching questions such as perspective or attitude or fairness, even in the way you do ethics, not as the subject matter of ethics, but in the way you do ethics, which is why I put feminist ethics up here. Yeah, and now the question is, of course, where can we sort ethics of AI? Is it here? Is it yet another field of applied ethics? Because it is a scientific and a commercial or industry domain, and maybe as robotics or nanotechnology, why not also put AI on the list of domain-specific ethics? I don't think that this is fair, because at least if you understand it slightly more broadly, as I do here in the lecture, more as an ethics of digitalization, digitalization is more a condition of life than a specific domain. And I would say increasingly AI is also a condition under which we live, compared to just a domain, which is why I would also put it actually as a perspective. Yeah, I mean, nowadays you do environmental research with AI, you do medicine with AI, you do bioengineering with AI, you do everything with AI. Businesses already long ago with AI. You might even come to the point that you do philosophy with AI. This is why I think that this topic swallows all the other things in a certain way, and ethically questioning AI would then again be a point of an overarching perspective on all of it, rather than, or a lens through which we reconsider ethical questions than only a domain. Yeah, so let's not contain this in a domain container, but let's try to really ask the question, what is a progressive philosophy and ethics in the digital age? More than what is a progressive philosophy and ethics about AI. Yeah, there is also the distinction of morals versus ethics, Moral and Ethik in Deutsch. And I mean, you can ask 5 philosophers and get 6 answers on that. I will try to stick with this here. For me, morality is the system of right and wrong behavior practiced as it is practiced in a group, culture, or society that regulates living together in various areas. Everybody has a morals, even implicitly. Yeah, in the sense of every like human society, group, being, and so on, age. So morality is more what is already there at a practical level, while ethics is, sorry, let's stick here with morality for one more bullet point. So morality includes norms, values, and principles that are internalized by the individuals. Yeah, that's what I mean by implicit. Yeah, you don't have to explicitly set up a morals for you or something. You grow up in society and then you are already in it. And ethics, in turn, would then be the systematic reflection on that. Yeah, so the systematic questioning with theoretical means, or with theoretical instrument thinking or questioning about that. That is how I try to use this relationship between ethics and morals here. Another triple of concepts that we need to tell apart and that often kind of get confused is values, rights, and norms, and we already had it in the bullet point earlier. Yeah?
I have a question for this bullet point of enforcing with sanctions for morality. What does it mean to enforce, for example, individual morality? How would that be enforced with sanctions?
You mean a morality that you set up only for yourself? Yeah. I don't know. Maybe then this is not a morality. Yeah, I mean, you can have a bad consciousness or feel bad for yourself, or I think one can argue that there is something like that. I mean, the question is, did you then really only do it for yourself, or isn't there something in the social environment that made you kind of impose that on you?
So the sanctions part is more about the society and culture.
Yeah, I mean, yes, because morality and ethics is only relevant once there are more than one people. Yeah, I mean, it's the whole idea about the ethical questions is that you always have to you act, but not only you, but also you act on others, and others act on you, and there something painful or beneficial might arise. So I think it is actually a very artificial to ask the question in this kind of isolationist fashion. Yeah. Values, right, and no. So values are general guidelines, yeah, about right or wrong, or good or bad behavior, or on the level of not single acts, but more broadly the desirable life, for instance. And for instance, yeah, I put these examples here: freedom, honesty, benevolence, and so on. But you can remember that they are kind of drivers, or motivational drivers for human action, and that also make they can serve as a grid to compare alternatives. Yeah, should I now go and sit in the sun, which isn't shining today, or should I stay here and talk to you? Maybe I can put it on a grid and then compare, and I don't know if that was a good example. This is different from rights. Yeah, rights are justified, and the point is generally recognized claims. A right is a claim. Yeah? You don't have a claim to honesty. So honesty is not a right. It's more a value. Yeah, you see, there is something voluntary in the value of honesty, and it makes only sense if it is voluntary. Yeah, if you are forced to honesty, then it's not honesty anymore. So a right is something in a way different from a value, and rights are often enshrined in law or in other statutes, can also be implicit statutes in a community, and typically you can kind of argue that you deserve it, or that, you have a claim, a justified claim, and part of this is also this kind of justification. And then there are these norms, and norms are more concrete than values. Yeah, norms are also not rights. Yeah, you don't have a claim typically to them, but they are more concrete or more actionable than values. For instance, so I wrote here concrete actionable rule that is specific to certain situations and contexts, maybe to certain domains, application domains. They don't force anybody. They respect, the examples, no force, or respect others' interests, do not lie. Yeah, you don't have a claim on that you don't lie. Honesty, but honesty is the value. Yeah, the value, but the value is still very general. Honesty in compared to the rule or the norm that says don't lie. Yeah, you see how the value of honesty is translated into a norm, don't lie, in this case. Yeah, this is this kind of triple of concepts. There is now another triple of concepts that I will be using even slightly more often. Moral status, moral agent, and moral patient. I really like the term moral patient, although it is slightly less common than the other two in philosophy. But let's go through them one by one. Moral status is the overarching concept. Yeah, moral status is the moral status of a being is the inherent moral value or worth of that entity, the sense in which an entity is to be morally considered and respected, and subject to moral rights and obligations. So, moral status is an ascription. Yeah, we ascribe moral status to, for instance, all of the human beings. Yeah, but we can also debate, maybe to animals, that is a debate, maybe to children, or to what extent to children. I mean, they are also human beings, I know, but some say that children's, for instance, they cannot act responsibly. I don't know, that's a debate, yeah? But it is important that there are certain entities in the world that enjoy this moral status. That means you can do moral wrong to them. Yeah, when you do something to them that would be a moral wrong. For instance, if I throw the bottle on the ground or destroy the bottle does not have a moral status. It will not be a moral wrong to the bottle. I mean, it might be a moral wrong to you because you own the bottle, but it will not be a moral wrong to the bottle because the bottle doesn't have a moral status. But if the bottle has a moral status, then it would be a moral harm that I commit to the bottle, and only if the bottle has a moral status. Yeah, you see the point of that concept? And then moral status is a general ascription. Yeah, I mean, the bottle has it or has it not, like now and also tomorrow and so on. But if it comes to a certain context where some action happens, there might be different kind of interacting partners, and if we want to analyze such a context in such a way that somebody does something to somebody else, then we can say that there are moral agents and moral patients. The moral agents are then the people acting, that acting, and this acting is morally. For instance, so here a moral agent is a being who is capable of acting with reference to moral principles, of making moral judgments. Yeah, for instance, when a kid commits a crime, then we will have to debate the question: to what extent is are children morally or criminally liable? Then we will have the question: is the kid really a moral agent in that situation? Because when you are born, you are certainly a human being. You have moral status, but you are hardly a moral agent because you are a baby. And then, as an adult, you are a full-fledged moral agent, and some point in between it must switch or gradually grow into moral agency. Yeah, so you see that moral agency is something different from moral status, because moral agency is something that comes with how much are you actually. Did you grow into this society or into this community of which it is the morality or the ethics, but also to what degree are you capable of moral judgment and moral reasoning? Yeah, there are debates that say, for instance, that people with certain mental impairments cannot be moral agents, or only to a lesser degree. Or if you are on drugs, you are to a different degree morally liable or a moral agent. Yeah, I'm not saying I submit, because there's also this position that says, yeah, but once you took the drug, you were a moral agent, and so on. But you see that moral agency is first something that not every entity that has moral status has, and second, it might come in degrees from 0 to full moral agency. And third, it also depends on the situation and how we analyze the situation. If, for instance, if I, what can I say? If I lie to you, then I was the moral agent, and because I was doing something to you, and you kind of were the receiver or the moral patient of that interaction. But the question is, does it really fall apart that way? Is it really me active, you passive, I lied and you suffered, you victim, I perpetrator? Or is it maybe I was also to a certain degree also a moral patient, and you also did something in the scene and so on? Yeah, you see that the ascription of moral agency versus moral patiency in analyzing a scene is always a decision to attribute certain degrees of activity and passivity to the people that are involved in the scene. And that's important for me, yeah, because this Western ethics has this, I would say, inclination, or maybe even problematic inclination, to think a lot in active versus passive roles. And especially when you ascribe moral responsibility, and sometimes it at least makes sense to be aware that this is involved when we talk about ethics, and we might even find strategies to counter this very binary choice of terminology. But for now, there is this this concept of the moral agent, and there is this concept of the moral patient, and the moral patient is in a certain situation of action if you analyze it that way, that one person only suffered from or received action, moral action, then you can say that is the moral patient, an entity that is morally acted upon, an entity that is treated morally right or wrong in a certain context of action. Analytically, it's important that you can be a moral patient without being a moral agent. For instance, animals are usually considered moral patients, but not moral agents. Yeah, we usually do not, or the majority of Western ethics does not ascribe moral agency to animals, non-human animals, but definitely considers suffering of non-human animals as a moral wrong, if it is inflicted by a moral agent. Yeah, so you can say that this small kid or this non-human animal, they are definitely moral patients in certain contexts without them being capable of moral agency. Yeah. Okay, sorry if that is confusing, but I think if you look at it soberly, it is actually not so confusing, and it makes a lot of sense. I have this slide comparing the three things. I did it in the text now. Maybe look at it at home, but it is basically what I just said in the form of a table. Yeah. Okay, let's get a little bit, I mean, that was really very basic concepts. Yeah, that was only terminology. Let's get slightly deeper, and only slightly, to cover at least the three most important normative schools in Western ethics. And we are now in this branch of normative ethics. Yeah, you remember ethics branching in general ethics and applied ethics, and within general ethics there was meta-ethics and normative ethics, and that is maybe the biggest part or the main part of theoretical general ethical discourse. Yeah?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I still have a question towards the previous part. In a moral patient, does it imply, maybe you said it already, but is it implied that the moral patient has a moral status?
Yes. Yes, if you are the moral or an entity that is the moral patient in a certain context of action, that implies that it is an entity that has moral status. Because otherwise, if you don't have moral status, you cannot do any moral wrong to the person, to the entity. Yes. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I would now like to zoom a little bit. Sorry, yeah, another question?
The opposites have moral status?
Yes, moral agency also implies moral status. Now it gets detailed. Usually moral agency implies moral status. I don't know why I put the usually, actually. Maybe it's a nice agency implies moral status. I don't know why I put usually, yeah?
This is a curiosity question, so it might go to scale. Is there something you can point to, or do you think why Western ethics likes to focus specifically on this binary of active and passive, while you find in other ethics it isn't the same case?
Very good question, and I think a very justified question. I don't have an easy answer. I mean, you can consider that a lot, and if you look at the history of Western ethics, you will find that it hasn't always been the case, but that since the Enlightenment, there is a tendency to interpret it in, I would say, liberalist and individualistic terms. And that is certainly something that you can put in a historical context with the emergence of liberalism, liberal economics, liberal societies in general. For instance, And that goes to the point of rereading the older. For instance, in Aristotle, you find a lot of community thinking in Aristotle's ethics. Ethics as care for the polis, for the political community. Not primarily as the question of, should I drink cola or should I drink water? But more like, is it good for a political community if there is Coca-Cola available? Which is a far more like communitarianist thinking. But in the way you would interpret or teach or read Aristotle since the last 300 years, these aspects would be slightly sidelined and interpreted more in an individualistic fashion, where it is me against you, or me wanting to be sure that I do the right thing so that nobody has a claim against me, or so that I can be kind of, don't have to have a bad conscience or whatever. So that I would say answering this question would need some time to engage in a diagnosis, Zeitdiagnose, like a broad investigation into how actually did political contexts, social thinking in general evolve over the last 2,500 years, and within certain, in this case, Central European traditions. And for instance, in Southeast Asia, it's completely different, even today. But in the Eurocentric or in the Euro-North American context, it's usually heavily influenced by liberalism. Yeah, it's my best short answer on that, but very good question. Let's continue. So, 3 normative schools in Western ethics, and the 3 schools are teleology, which is also often termed consequentialism, which is the ethical normative doctrine that morality of an action is contingent on the action's outcome or result. Yeah? You judge the action by what it affects. Another school is deontology, in German also Pflichtethik, where the morality of an action is judged in relation to rules and duties and not the outcomes. I will explain each of these in more slides in the following, just as an overview here. And the third form I would like to stress, and that goes back to Aristotle, and that has more communitarian or social aspects in it than the other two, is virtue ethics, but it has also gone through a heavily individualistic interpretation through the Enlightenment period. But virtue ethics focuses on the virtues or moral character of the person or community, I'd add, performing an action. As a rule of thumb, virtue ethics or acting morally right means acting virtuously according to virtue ethics, acting out of duty according to deontological ethics. Yeah, D, duty, and D, I tried to give you shorthands to memorize. Deontology, duties, deontology. And acting with the best over utility in mind according to teleological ethics. Teleological is always the thing that lies in the future as the end point. And let's go through these 3 because they are heavily important in our cultural context here, and start by teleology or consequentialism. One of the most important versions of consequentialism is, and I guess you all know it, utilitarianism. And utilitarianism, it goes back to guys like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, who are also the co-inventors of modern liberal economics in Great Britain. It goes back to these guys, and they say the ethical goal is to maximize utility. Yeah, you should judge your actions by how can I maximize outcome or utility in whatever that means. And what did that mean here? For instance, in Bentham, you can read that utility is that, and I'm quoting, that property in any object whereby it tends to produce benefit, advantage, pleasure, good, or happiness, or to prevent the happening of mischief, pain, evil, or unhappiness to the party whose interest is considered. Aha. A party whose interest is considered needs to be referenced here. So you see, an act does not have utility per se, but it's always a question, utility for whom? For you, for all of you, for those who are not here, represented here, and so on. Yeah, that is the questions of the nasty questions in utilitarianism. But I must warn you not to confuse utilitarianism with egoism. Every philosophically viable utilitarian position would not say the goal is to maximize utility for me or for my mother and so on, but no, for all of humanity. That is often the claim, or the goal considers the interest of all humans equally, whatever equally means, and always acts so as to produce the greatest aggregate happiness among all sentient beings, whatever that means. You can imagine that this comes with severe theoretical problems. Yeah, how do I calculate the integral over all of you and your happiness? Yeah, how do I quantify happiness so that I can add your happiness with your, and with the people who are not represented here, with the people in the global south, and with the people that I don't want to consider, and then have an aggregate sum of happiness, and that I need to maximize. That comes with huge problems, and utilitarianism always has these questions of distribution. Yeah, who do we consider? Whose value or benefits do we consider? That is always what gets swept under the carpet, or some theories have it very explicitly. But when you see utilitarianism on the street or in corporate rhetorics, it's usually swept under the carpet. How is utilitarianism relevant in the context of AI? I would say it is heavily relevant because it is what usually gets used as a corporate rhetorics. For instance, here, I just put general examples. There are so many initiatives that want to collect your health data to do some research, or maybe nice corporate research and development with it. And it's often the rhetoric that says, yeah, you donate your data, it's a little harm for you, it's a little kind of privacy issue maybe, but it will serve a great benefit to humanity. There you have this kind of reasoning, you versus humanity. You, a small pain for you versus a great aggregate utility for all of us. That is a typical way of, I would say, abusing utilitarian arguments in corporate rhetorics. Here, as another concrete example, there was the UK Biobank. I don't know if you know it, but it's this central public company in the US that was founded in the 2000s by the government, not in the US, in the UK, that was founded in the 2000s to collect health data of some 100,000 UK citizens to make it available for research. And they also found out that it also went to insurance industry and to other industries that wanted to do risk scoring with it. And so it's heavily, nowadays it's heavily contested whether this is actually ethical, what they are doing. But it was created with this utilitarian mindset that we have to serve all of humanity, and we judge our, like, it will be a small burden to the people in the database, but the effects will outweigh that by far. I tried to collect some observations about utilitarianism in practice in the context of AI, and as I told you already, it is often leveraged in corporate ethics messaging. It is a common justification in our societies to justify data collection, minimum harm to you, benefit for humanity, and it comes with certain problems. There are very intelligent philosophical versions of utilitarianism that solve some of these problems, or that at least explicitly reflect on them. So there's always a difference between the kind of philosophical theory and how it is used. But as a general guideline, like hotspots of problems in utilitarianism that need careful consideration are questions of distribution, whose benefits and so on is being considered, and do we all have equal access to the benefits? Yeah, it's, of course, if I do health research in theory, that will serve all of humanity, but do we all have access to the health products that come out of this research? For instance, if it's done by a private company and so on, and if you look closely, it turns out that you don't have equal access. But also intertemporal aspects. Utilitarianism always comes with promises. Yeah, you do something now in order to be able to benefit many people in the future, and judging from that now, you will have to have some trust in that development, that it will really lead to that outcome. And of course, I mean, there's always the risk of failure, for instance, in research, but there's also the risk that just corporate decisions change. Yeah, that there are people along the way making decisions that just don't care for the promise that was given initially. And that is, I would say, a huge problem when you use this kind of reasoning in the digital society. Yes, I put that here in these points. Let's get to something very dry, deontology, very German also, very dry and very German. Deontology is Pflichtethik, yeah, the duty ethics. And I would say the key position in deontology, although not the only one, is Immanuel Kant's ethics. Immanuel Kant's very famous Enlightenment ethics. You always must think about Prussia, Großpreußen, back then with our herrlicher junger Kaiser, no, that was not the young one, but the old one. Anyway, Kaiserreich, Deutsches Kaiserreich, and Immanuel Kant came up with this position that said, no, in judging moral action, we should not look at the outcome, because there are so many contingencies that we cannot foresee. Yeah? The outcome is uncertain. People on the way from the decision to the outcome might not be reliable. And we will have to say a benefit for you is more important than a benefit for you, or I don't know how to add up or compare your two benefits, or like, is the life of 3 people, is curing cancer for 3 more important than half curing cancer for 300? How would I make that comparison? These are all problems of utilitarianism that Kant did not like, and said, no, we need an ethics that judges the moral right or wrong of an action, not by looking at the consequences, but by looking at the intentions or the premises from which the action comes. And so he came up in his philosophy with this concept of the good will. Yeah? What counts is not the consequence of an action, but that it is performed out of goodwill. Good. What is goodwill? Nothing in the world can possibly be conceived which could be called good without qualification except a goodwill. Okay, that only undermines the very foundational status of this concept of goodwill in Immanuel Kant. He then has this famous categorical imperative to test for this criteria. And the categorical imperative, it comes in different versions, but it has also 2 very foundational aspects. The one is universalizability. I think you say that. Yeah, the thing is, and I'm again quoting, act only according to that maxim by which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Yeah, if you make a decision right now, then you always will have to generalize and then ask yourself, okay, do I want this to become a universal law? So should I steal a bottle of water from the kiosk? Then the test would be, can we generally morally want that one is allowed to just take a bottle of water from a kiosk? And then, or maybe not from a kiosk, how to generalize kiosk from a shop, how to generalize shop from bourgeoisie, I don't know. You see how, but you see the test is universalizability. Yeah, don't do anything to somebody where you don't want this to be done in return. It's also a version of this principle. You always try to abstract and then ask, okay, is this a society, or is this maybe, does it lead to contradictions, or is this a society that we want? Yeah, there's also the second version, act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of another, always as this, at the same time as an end and never simply as a means. Complicated formulation for something that has turned into the principle of human dignity, which is of huge importance in Western, not only ethics, but even legal systems, or the understanding of the state and so on. Yeah, the humans are always an end in themselves and not a means to an end. You should not just use humans to achieve some other end, but humans are the end in itself. That is also this very famous way of formulating this categorical imperative. And these are all meant as formulas to kind of test or judge for, is this an action that comes out of what Kant hails as the goodwill? Yeah, this is a complicated topic that you can fill a whole lecture on Kant's ethics, and it has been immensely influential, not only in Germany, although this is very German, and I'm saying this in a caricature sense. It has been so influential because it was, for instance, the foundation to such things like the human rights, yeah, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I think it wouldn't be there without Kant's ethics, or the principle of human dignity in more general. According to Kant, humans or human life should not be discussed in terms of value, but are ends. Yeah, the utilitarianism always has to weigh like different benefits for different humans and compare them or add them up or form an integral over all humans of the benefit to them and so on. And that is something that Kant says, no, it's incompatible with the principle that humans are an end in themselves, and every human has human dignity, and human dignity is not a number that you can add up. And by saving 3 lives, you saved 3 times 1,000 units of human dignity or something. That is bullshit in terms of Kant. And that has its kind of manifestation in this idea of human dignity and human rights, foundation for the modern conception of human dignity. And where is it? Here, the human dignity is a grounding principle of the Human Rights Declaration, which is an outflow of deontological ethics. Yeah, how is deontological ethics relevant actually today or in the context of AI? I tried to ask myself that question for all of these 3 normative schools I'm presenting to you here. I would say that deontological ethics even has a renaissance in the context of AI. And this comes from the problem that if you want to build ethically well-behaving AI systems, you will have to hard-code certain general rules to which this system needs to obey. Yeah, imagine you want to build a service robot or an elderly care robot, and you want to make sure that it behaves ethically. Then you will be facing the question, okay, well, what are the most general ethical rules to which it should obey? Yeah, then you are suddenly faced with questions of generalization. And it's much easier if you approach these problems by a principle that does not look at the consequences, because the consequences are hard to calculate for the robot, but better like something like the intentions or the underlying attitude of the act. And the attitude here is an attitude of rule following, and you follow the rules that you can test positively by the categorical imperative. Yes?
How would deontology look at the dilemma like the one we often assume with AI, like the problem either rather to be person of all people or young people? Like what's your will in that situation?
Yeah, as all ethical normative theories, they are like, as a general rule you can remember, each normative theory has corner cases which are exactly dilemma in this very theory, which you cannot solve. And in deontological ethics, That is one of the dilemma. It would just not weigh between the two options. Yeah, it would say here people are killed, there people are killed, both at the same level. That's unsatisfactory potentially, but from that in that framework, it's just 2 times 0, if you will. There are more intricate examples that by which Kant himself was confronted. For instance, if you have to rescue somebody, but on rescuing somebody you kill some other person that was formerly uninvolved and so on. So you can construct really mind-blowing examples that that will demonstrate another corner case of that ethical principle. But I would say that ethical principles have corner cases that are not decidable, does not prove them wrong, or that does not even prove them useful, as long as the corner cases are not too frequent. And the self-driving car ending up in such a situation, as you would say in these ethics of self-driving cars, maybe something got wrong way before. Maybe something got wrong before you end up in a situation where you can only crash into that person or that person. Maybe you should have braked like 30 seconds ago, or I don't know what you did wrong, but potentially the aspiration must be there that the car doesn't even end up in that situation. And by the way, where in driving lessons, like when you make your driving license, where did you learn in the Theoriestunden which crowd of people you have to drive over? Did you learn anything on that? Possibly not, right? So it is also left to chance with human drivers, in the same way as deontological ethics would leave it to chance with the robot drivers. But still, if you want to ethically align autonomous systems, you will face situations where you need to find generalized rules. And that's where deontology becomes quite interesting, actually. Yeah, deontological frameworks help designers hard code ethical boundaries. The term is boundaries, because within that there might still be ethical considerations. There might be two options that are not distinguished by deontological ethics because they set the boundaries, but within these boundaries you might adopt other ethical principles or other forms of ethical reasoning to make the decision. And that is then a multi-approach framework that is actually all serious modern ethicists would use multi-approaches and not only deontology or only utilitarianism and so on. Never deceive a user, always protect user privacy, do not use lethal force. Just stupid examples for how you might hard code certain generalizable moral principles in AI. Also in the privacy context, that is often, and we will come to that in this lecture. Privacy or data protection has a very intimate relationship to deontology because this is a preventive form of regulation. You are not allowed to do some things with personal data to prevent harm, so that the legal point of intervention is before the harm occurs. And therefore, it is not something that looks at the consequences, but something that prevents consequences by governing the acts and not governing the consequences of the act. There is a very intimate relation between deontology and data protection. Maybe data protection is so strong in German because of that. I don't know. Virtue ethics, sorry. Virtue ethics, maybe the most famous proponent is Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher. And virtue ethics is slightly different from the two previous ones. The two previous ones are like enfant terrible, always fighting each other and always competing against each other. Virtue ethics is a little bit on top of both, maybe. It's a class of normative theories that comes with this concept of moral virtue. And a moral virtue is a matter more of the character. It's a disposition. A virtue is a disposition to think, feel, and act well in some domain of life. And this term of disposition has a lot of magic to it here. Like, what is a disposition? It's not you act in a certain way in this concrete situation, but it's more you are disposed. Yeah, for instance, by your character or by your psychology or by your mood and so on, you are disposed in a certain way to act. Think of virtues as a matter of moral character. So judging the person and their moral character and not the single acts. That is the question or the perspective of virtue ethics. It asks more, not was this single scene like yesterday evening when you had this argument and then you took the kitchen knife, was that right? No, it's more the question, okay, what is it in your character that you actually rose your voice and then even grabbed the kitchen knife? What disposition in you? And like asking about character dispositions is always interesting when you consider actions that are too quick to think. Yeah, how do you act automatically? Yeah, when you're pressurized, when you are threatened, or when you have an argument, when you maybe raise your voice without wanting to raise it, when you get violent or suffer from violence. Yeah, that is, I would say, the most intriguing point where you can observe character dispositions. Yeah, usually when we have a lot of time to think, we can conceal our character impulses and character dispositions. And one second, and the point where virtue ethics kind of gets active is to form your character dispositions. So your, in a way, automatic ways or effective ways of reacting or acting. And usually in the situation itself, things happen much too quickly for you to have an impact on it. But you can retreat from the scene maybe afterwards. Think about it. Why did I raise my voice? I don't want to be that person raising my voice in such a situation. So what did me make me raise my voice, and how can I prevent it next time? Maybe next time it gets a little bit better and so on. So this kind of ethics is this practice that has a back and forth with real-time scenes and then reflecting on it and real-time scenes and so on. And now you.
This judging a person and their moral character, the inherent in the person kind of rubs me the wrong way a little bit. Like modern psychological research kind of really more suggests that the person has, due to what they experienced in childhood, certain certain kind of predispositions in their brain, and that kind of sets the blueprint on how they develop. And there's like a limited sense of how much you can then correct that. And it's certainly you are impacted by that. So judging the person kind of compared to the context.
Yeah, I understand. I think it gets it quickly gets nasty when you understand this kind of ethics as judging another person. But I think it gets highly productive when you judge yourself. And the attitude, it's about an attitude, and the attitude says, my way of reacting is shaped by my biography, including my childhood, but it is not determined by it. And there's always some leeway to actively engage with it, or actively maybe even work on it or alter it. We cannot alter it arbitrarily. We cannot get rid of every trauma, every kind of shaping in our childhood, but we can, through working it through and consciously kind of gestalten, creating it, co-creating it, we can make a change. And that is, I would say, the point of virtue ethics.
Then I would say that mostly people would then face off this kind of injustice of having.
Sorry, can you be slightly louder?
Yeah, so many people who face this kind of injustice, what I described, of, let's say, for example, being beaten in childhood, then ends up with a life where they don't really have the time because they are in certain jobs, and then they face the dilemma of not having this time, right? And so maybe we here in the university have the privilege, and from us it should be more expected than from others. So it raises the question of whether there is a unified way of judging it.
Yeah, okay, thank you. You're always one step before me. Because previously I said we should maybe at first get rid of judging others and only judge ourselves. Now you say, yeah, but maybe there are some people who are not privileged enough to have time to judge themselves or reflect on themselves. And yes, this is true, which is why, as a society, we might want to build a society or a framework or a culture or support structures that facilitate this, once again, as a joint process, but a joint process that does not judge you, but aids you. Yeah, so I would say forget about the judgment term. It's more, this is a nexus, like this self-reflection is a nexus, and I would say you have to do it yourself. You cannot have it be done by somebody else. That would be very paternalistic, judgmental, and so on. But in order to do it yourself, you still rely on resources in your culture. Yeah, from writing diary and learning how to do that, to going to the psychologist, to nice literature, novels, Netflix movies, or other things that give you advice. And all cultures have a certain repertoire on offer of self-reflection and kind of self-cultivation. And it is always a balance of judging others and or being too egoistic on the other hand. And so I think there is something in between where virtue ethics in its best would happen. Yeah?
Is then the goal of virtue ethics to do this working of your own virtues after moments, to ask myself why do I do this, and then over time change it so that in the moment you act differently? Is that the goal of virtue ethics?
That is at least what I suggested before, but now as you ask the question in this way, I need to make clear that this is not the goal of the virtue ethics. Yeah? There are many virtue ethics out there, but for instance, in Aristotle, that was the approach. In psychoanalysis, that is also maybe the approach if you interpret psychoanalysis. Just to give you a very modern endpoint of a tradition that lasts so far back. Yes, and I personally also find this very interesting, to go back and forth between real-time situations where you don't have time to think, but then work them through afterwards, and then you have an impact on the next time a real-time situation happens. You really can cultivate your reflexes. Good, nice discussion. I get a little bit of time problem here now, but let's continue. Yeah, so being a good person and not a good decision or a good act, but a good person is something in virtue ethics. Yeah. How is that relevant in the context of AI? I immediately have to think of this here. Yeah, whistleblowing is definitely maybe something that you can best justify by virtue ethics. Because it is an outflow of the virtue of courage, for instance. That is what some people might argue. And now I'm getting a little bit quicker. Here, Virginia Dignum, in the book that I already mentioned before, has a nice overview of these three normative schools and also of these more elementary concepts I mentioned in the previous part. So you might want to turn to that if you want to do some readings. There's also this book here that I can recommend. I would like to... at least I tried this the last part of the lecture. We will not get through it completely, but I will try to do as much as we can until 3:45, and then we continue next week. And this picks up on the question that we already debated. Who is the moral agent in AI? And that is the subtext of the question is why is this framing so individualistic? And most approaches in Western ethical tradition have one thing in common, as we said already. They assume a single well-defined moral agent as the subject of ethical reasoning. Yeah, and well-defined, and you can also add sufficiently equipped with the mental resources, time resources, privilege to even care or be in the position to care about ethical discourses. Yeah, or like they can be as oppositional as, for instance, deontological ethics and utilitarianism, they compete, or they are opposites in so many ways, yeah, these normative approaches, but they still have this assumption in common, that they believe in a single well-defined subject that is capable of engaging in their discourse, and that is kind of the decision center where you can make an ethical difference. By the subject, the moral agent, engaging in ethical discourse and thinking everything through and maybe deciding differently, that makes an ethical difference. That is the assumption shared by all the classical Western ethical traditions. And by classical here, I mean not Greek, but more like in the Enlightenment and following centuries. How does AI fit into that picture? And you remember how I look at AI systems. I mean, there are people who say, yeah, obviously, ethics of AI is about AI systems being the moral agents. Yeah, AI systems, they are autonomous or maybe partially autonomous, so they will be the moral agents. And ethics of AI is about how can we understand AI systems as moral agents, or how can we program them in a way that they are morally behaving as moral agents, and so on. I would say, and I have the biggest part of ethics of AI behind me in that, no, AI systems are not moral agents. We should refrain from putting or anthropomorphizing AI systems in such a way that we put them in the position of the moral agents. Yeah, we should not ascribe moral agency to the AI system. Interesting. Maybe this is why I put usually on the slide. Yeah, you remember usually moral agency implies a moral status. And of course, AI systems do not have a moral status, but there are some ethical positions, for instance, machine ethics, which would put AI systems in the role of the moral agent. And as I do not follow these positions, but still want to acknowledge them, I put usually on that slide. Yeah, so nice, we found it out now. Yeah, so there is this one subfield of AI ethics called machine ethics that follows on that idea that in AI we are building machines which are acting or which are then moral agents, so that they themselves have moral responsibility. Yeah, this is distinct from the statement saying that AI systems can do some moral reasoning. Of course, I can ask ChatGPT a moral question, and then it will do some reasoning, and then it has some outcome, and maybe it can even enact the outcome. But I'm still not saying that this is then a moral agent. I would say ascribing moral agency to such systems, how much automated reasoning they can do is untouched by this. Ascribing moral agency to them is an act of anthropomorphization that we shouldn't do. Are AI systems, can they be fitted in the role of moral patients? Like, can they morally suffer? If I beat my little dog robot, will it be a moral wrong to the robot? Certainly not. Yeah, it's a machine. And again, would then be a risk of anthropomorphization. There is again one subfield of AI ethics, which is not the same as machine ethics, which follows on this idea, and it's these contributions calling for robot rights or even robot citizenships. Yeah, so for each of these ideas, you have some freaks out there following on the idea. I don't want to deny, but denying these two things is in the majority of ethics of AI uncontested, that they are not moral agents and they are not moral patients. And I will also certainly refrain from these ideas. Yeah, okay, but what then? How can we then fit AI into this terminology that we inherit in the Western philosophical tradition? Maybe humans are the moral agents, and AI are tools through which we act. Yeah, if I use a certain tool, this bottle, to kill you, then I'm still the moral agent. It's not the bottle that killed you, it's me. And if I use an AI system to kill you, maybe why would it be the AI system killing you? I mean, yeah, of course, you say, because the AI system made an autonomous decision. It selected me as the target of the killing. It wasn't you selecting me, but then I say, no, it was still me adopting this AI system, and I knew very well that it is in the range of the action of that AI system to select somebody for killing and then to kill that person, so it is still my responsibility. And that is a little bit the idea behind that position, that when it comes to the responsibility, human operators of such systems, creators, designers, operators of such systems will not get out. That doesn't deny that you delegate portions of the decision-making, or even vast portions of the decision-making to the system, but the moment you deploy the system, it is your responsibility to first know how much or what is the agential range of the system, what could it do, and then to also safeguard against certain immoral outcomes. So this is actually the position also taken up by most scholars, that yes, the moral agency is with the humans, and but now the question is, what about the role of the technology? And in the proposition here, it states that the technology is a mere instrument, and the problem is that this is also wrong. The technology is not merely an instrument. It is not merely a means through which you reach your ends. Yeah, and if an instrumental relation means you have a certain thing you want to achieve, I want to drink water, so I use the bottle, or I pour it in the bottle so I can drink it. Then I use the bottle as an instrument, because the end point is already there. Yeah, I want to drink water later, and I need a handy tool to achieve that end. But this is not the case in technology, because technology in part precedes its ends. Yeah, an instrumental relationship is only there if you say the ends are already there, and then the second question is, okay, what is the tool to achieve the end? This is the best tool, okay. I want to hang the picture on the wall, this is my end, what is the best tool? A sticky stripe or a nail? Well, let's better take the nail, then it's an instrumental relationship to the nail. But if the presence of the nail creates my wish to hang the picture on the wall, then the relationship is not only instrumental anymore, at least not to the technology of nails. And that is systematically the case in technology, and I think I will have to start the next session describing that to you in more detail, but let's at least look at this here. So my message is that emerging technologies such as AI fall in an interesting gap between two things. The one is that we cannot, or it will lead to contradictions if we ascribe moral agency to the systems. For instance, it would imply that the humans are kind of out of the loop, which we should not want, because it is the humans who build, deploy, and use the systems, and who are therefore morally responsible. But at the same time, the technologies are not mere instruments in the sense that ethical implications of building, deploying, and using AI systems, they do go beyond means and rationality. And so we will need an approach that factors, or that puts AI technology into this kind of terminology without reducing it to an instrumental status, but without alleviating it to a moral agency status. That's where we will pick it up next time. So one announcement. One announcement. There will be an event on the 3rd of June by my work group, actually a very big one in the theater here in Osnabrück. We will, under this title, it will be in German, so under the title of Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Democracy, we will have a big public event, which is actually a discussion event on what Elon Musk, Donald Trump, AI technology, Silicon Valley CEOs are doing to the US, American democracy, and maybe also in Europe. So if you are interested, one has to get a free ticket before. Yeah, it's free of charge, but you have to get a ticket from the Theaterkasse. Otherwise, if it's full, they will return you. That's why I'm announcing it here now, because the pre-sale of the tickets is already running. Thank you very much. See you next time. Discussion groups start this week, yeah, on Thursday and Friday, and they will be discussing the 2 videos with you. Yeah, the video by Andrew Ng and the video by Luis von Ahn. And the stuff from today is only background reading.